Greetings all you ghouls and gals and everyone in between. This is the Shredlord here, starting a brand new type of video in our series. It's going to be known as the Axeweilders Spotlight. So the whole point of this is to highlight various guitar players throughout the metal genre, give you a little background on them, and then I'm going to personally go through some of my top favorite riffs, songs, and solos. So without further ado, the very first guitar player I thought was fitting to do is the Lord Toni Iommi. Toni Iommi was born in 1948 in Birmingham, England, as Anthony Frank Iommi. He is quite possibly the most influential guitar player of this entire genre, spawning many subgenres and inspiring countless musicians and guitar players throughout this genre. Now, what makes Toni Iommi such a great guitar player is his ability to craft endless amounts of crushing, heavy, powerful, doom-type riffs, combining that with very melodic, sometimes frantic, full of energy, blues rock bass type solos. Over his career, he has had, 19 studio albums with Black Sabbath, 3 solo albums, 2 of which I absolutely adore. The very first one, self-titled Iommi, had many awesome guest appearances, such as like Phil Anselmo and Peter Steele, popular artists back in the day referred as Skin. Really cool, a lot of guest vocals, guest musicians, that was really cool. Also, he did one called Fused with Glenn Hughes of Deep Purple fame, the bass player and the singer, and that is an incredibly underrated album in his entire catalog. Really good songwriting, very heavy. It has all the things you would love. Plus, Glenn Hughes' voice is very unique and it lends itself well to this album. So actually, on a side note, if you haven't checked that album out, any of those albums, please do. You're definitely in for a treat if you're a fan of Sabbath and Iommi. All right, let's go ahead and get into the riffs. Now, I've picked 5. A little bit of a disclaimer, I'll say. These are my 5 personal favorites that I've gone over. You may disagree. I'm actually interested to see if people make their own list in the comment sections. I'd love to see what their top 5 riffs or songs or solos would be. I'm not saying necessarily that this is the best. These are ones that are just personal favorites of mine. And obviously, like I said before, with 19 studio albums, I mean, how do you dwindle that stuff down? You don't. That's why you just kind of try to make it a small personalized type list that's more geared towards my personal tastes. So without further ado, let's start with the number 1 riff. Black Sabbath off the album Black Sabbath, 1970. 3 notes, powerful as hell. Great riff, super influential. You know, everybody knows that riff, even if you're not necessarily the biggest Sabbath fan. When you hear boom, you're like, fuck yeah. And what's cool about that is that kind of embodies Sabbath's and Toni Iommi's whole style. You know, he has this awesome way of being devilishly beautiful. So it's creepy, it's scary, it's heavy, it's all these cool things all at once. Number 2, I would say, would be off Volume 4, 1972, Supernaut. From what I understand, that song was kind of constructed for Bill Ward to kind of strut his stuff as a drummer. However, that riff is undeniably cool and personally one of my favorites. I can't help but bang the shit out of my head when I hear it or watch it live on YouTube or wherever else you watch videos, concert DVDs, so on and so forth. Just super simple, almost kind of groovy in a way. You know, it's different than Black Sabbath, the riff Black Sabbath, to where it's not slow as much as it's down, it's got a lot of energy and it keeps moving and a lot of groove. So that's cool. It shows a little bit of a different aspect of his writing capabilities. Number 3 would be Dirty Women off Technical Ecstasy from 1976, or the very first time I heard it would be the Reunion album in 1998. It is a very slow, heavy, punishing riff that has instantly become one of my favorites ever since I heard it. It went from not even knowing that song existed to hearing it, and now it's definitely, without a doubt, one of my favorite Black Sabbath songs. Once again, it's really heavy, really crushing, and that whole song is just really underrated badassery of Black Sabbath. I would be really surprised if a lot of people who are just common listeners would even know what that song is. So if you haven't heard it, definitely check out the whole track, but definitely the opening riff as well. Riff number 4. Falling Off the Edge of the World from 1981's The Mob Rules. If I had to say my favorite era of Sabbath, it would definitely be the Dio era, just because of being such a giant fan of Ronnie James Dio. I obviously love the Tony Martin stuff, and of course the Ozzy Osbourne, and even the one-off album with Ian Gillan of Deep Purple. But there was something magical in the songwriting and in the songs and everything with the Dio era to me that kind of always stuck and resonated with me. Falling Off the Edge of the World is definitely one of them. It showcases, there's two riffs that kind of showcase themselves back to back. The first being this very pretty, dark, haunting guitar arpeggiation into the very fast, steady-paced, quick-moving riff of the main verse, main part of the song. Both albums, well, there's 3 albums, but 2 in a row with Ronnie James Dio. Like I said, the songwriting was definitely a little bit different than anything that Iommi had done with Ozzy. If anything, I believe Dio kind of pushed Toni a little bit to go and try different things and go to different places that maybe he hadn't yet when it came to constructing riffs or songwriting. So that's a really great riff. Definitely check it out if you haven't heard it. Fifth and the last one would be a track off of the 3rd album that Dio did with Black Sabbath in 1992's Dehumanizer album. It's called Buried Alive. Right off the bat, it's just a very heavy, very doomy riff. It kicks a lot of ass. There was another track called Time Machine that was on the Wayne's World soundtrack, and another track from that album that I'll get into. But what's cool about Buried Alive is it's just heavy, aggressive. There's no clean parts or nothing like that. It's just balls from the wall right from the get-go. So those are my top 5 riffs. Let's go ahead and get into top 5 songs. Number 1, Children of the Grave from 1971's Master of Reality. From start to finish, that song is epic as hell, and it has everything that you would love in it. It's got great riffs, it's got good build-ups, it's got a badass guitar solo, the drums are killer, Geezer Butler destroys almost everything he ever touches. It's just badassery, and it's a classic. I don't even really need to say more. I'm sure 99% of you have heard it, and if you haven't, shame on you. Number 2, 1973's Sabbath Bloody Sabbath from the album Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Once again, a young Joseph heard the opening riff of that and immediately fell in love with it. I also really love the artwork of that album. It's really kind of creepy and cool. There's a really cool breakdown in Sabbath Bloody Sabbath that I really like. Once again, it has all the good parts. It's got a good riff. It's got a decent solo. It's got a little bit of a groove, especially during the breakdown. So it compiles all the good stuff. Reason being, it's on my list. Number 3, Heaven and Hell from Heaven and Hell, 1981. The very first album that Toni and Dio ever worked on together and created one of the biggest hits in their entire catalog. It is, without a doubt, an epic masterpiece. It is probably, if I feel like a shithead for not remembering it, but it's about 8 or 9 minutes long, I bet. And once again, it's beautifully constructed and it's a masterpiece from start to finish. It has a lot of parts, like even live, where Dio will do the vocal chants with the crowd and get everybody going. It's got that nice somber mood in the back. And then they kick ass, play the riffs, get nice and heavy. Then they do a little bit of a breakdown. And then finally at the very end, it's do-do-do-do-do-do-do. They pick it up double time and just kick a lot of ass all the way through the end. It is one of the true masterpieces of the Sabbath collection, in my opinion. And once again, you definitely should have fucking heard it, because if you didn't, I'm ready to disown you. Number 4, Mob Rules from Mob Rules 1981. One of my favorite, it's one of my favorite riffs, but I wanted to include this in the song section, and I'll tell you why. Because to me, from front to back, that song is incredibly powerful. Right from the beginning, Dio screaming to the dan and dan, the opening riff, to the screaming, to the build-ups, and the solo. There's just so many things that catch me in that song. It definitely deserved to be on the song portion of the list versus just one riff. And last but not least, number 5 would be Psycho Man off the Reunion album 1998. When they got back together, they had wrote a new song, and it was Psycho Man. Now, lyrically, it's a little bit Jingle Bells-y and kind of campy B-horror movie. But from a songwriting and a riff standpoint and the bass and production and everything, It was an incredibly modern recording sound of Black Sabbath, and it just sounded heavy as hell from the first time I heard it. There's a lot of cool, creepy, slow doom riffs that slowly turn into a double, like not a double bass thing, but more of like an up-tempo double time riff right before they kind of take it out. From start to back, a good song, plus one of my favorite solos, really wah-drenched, really laying on the notes, just kind of bending notes and sitting there and just letting them set in. Really powerful. I love the song. If I could change maybe the lyrics a little bit, I might do that. But other than that, I think it's great. There's some other Thralls who might not agree with me, but fuck them, it's my Shred Corner. All right. Last but certainly not least, solos. Now, once again, I kind of briefly touched base on Toni Iommi's solo style being a very blues-based solo style. Tony has a lot of feel, and because he's missing his fingers, he has a really cool, fluid way that he moves through scales, and it's unique only to him. So you really can tell when it's Tony playing, especially when he starts digging in, getting fast, because you can almost hear the plastic sliding across the strings while he's going, and it sounds cool, man. It's part of his sound. It's definitely what makes him him. So without further ado, the very first solo would be Over and Over off the Mob Rules. The reason I chose this solo is a lot of Black Sabbath's catalog obviously is very heavy or epic sounding or, you know, doom sounding. What's cool about Over and Over is essentially a ballad where Dio is, you know, beautifully singing his guts out, but Tony really gets a chance to showcase his melodic side of his guitar playing and really came up with a lot of beautiful lines, and there's probably like 2 or 3, 4 minutes of just soloing, and he's just tearing it up. It gives me goosebumps every time I listen to it, and once again, I really think it's a great showcase of the melodic side and the feel that Toni Iommi has in his lead playing. Number 2, Bible Black from the band Heaven and Hell, off the album The Devil You Know. Now, due to legal restrictions, when Dio and Toni Iommi and the rest of the original Heaven and Hell lineup reunited, they could not use the name Black Sabbath anymore. So they chose the name Heaven and Hell based on their epic masterpiece song Heaven and Hell off the album Heaven and Hell. When they released this album, they had a track called Bible Black. Bible Black is almost, to me, like Heaven and Hell Part 2. It is an epic masterpiece that has all the trimmings of a masterpiece. It has a very beautiful, creepy, dark intro. Dio starts, you know, slowly crooning us with his badassery. And then, of course, once the crooning's done about 2 minutes or so, 1.5 minutes in, it just starts kicking ass with this really great, really heavy, real headbanging riff. The choruses on that song, from a vocal standpoint, are incredible, but the solo itself really stands out to me, and it was the first opportunity for me in a long time to hear what Toni Iommi, you know, was going to sound like, because before that I think it'd been definitely some years before he actually put out an album. So what's great about that solo is it's very intense and very epic sounding, but he handles it like a champ the whole way through and creates some great melodic statements along with some really exciting fast parts. So combined, it makes it one of my favorite Toni Iommi solos, easy. Number 3, I off the album Dehumanizer. The whole song of I is perfect, but the reason, once again, that I chose it for the solos and not maybe a song or not the riff is it is without a doubt one of my favorite Toni Iommi solos. It's wah-drenched. It's very bluesy, has a lot of feel in it, and once again, it's a great combination or a great blend of feel and speed. So it's really exciting at times, but it's also, you know, hits a couple of those notes that'll give you goosebumps. Definitely some good shit. Number 4, a classic, War Pigs. One of the early Toni Iommi masterpieces. That song is a Black Sabbath masterpiece, no doubt, but even people who are non-musicians could probably sing you most of that solo that he does from that song, and that says a lot because it is something that was perfectly, in my opinion, it's perfectly constructed. You couldn't have played anything else over top of that and had it sound any better. That was the perfect solo, and not only was it perfect, it slowly built, it was very exciting, and it was epic as fuck. So for those reasons right there, War Pigs will always be one of the best Toni Iommi solos, in my opinion, because of how memorable it truly is. Last and certainly not least, the solo to the Mob Rules. Once again, of course it's on this list because it's one of my favorites, but what I really appreciate is it's very high energy and it doesn't stop. The whole way through, it is riff-tastic. It's shreddy McBalls. I love it. It still has a lot of feel, but while being very intense and very in your face. And once again, to me personally, sometimes when Toni Iommi just turns the wah on and hits a fucking note and just lets it sit there and vibratos it, that's the fucking shit, man. Like, that's the feel, man. It's there, and it sounds great, and it really connects with me. So Toni has always been a fucking god, but I feel like as time went on, less and less people truly appreciated what he brought to the guitar world and the solo world, because you have all sorts of new players who are, yeah, maybe they're technically better than Toni, but in my opinion, nobody will ever match Toni's songwriting and riff ability. He'll forever be the Lord of the Riff, master of the riff. Nobody can touch him on that. And he has some really beautiful from the heart type of leads, even if they're not the cleanest things you've ever heard. He's definitely not sloppy by any means, but he's not going to play Yngwie Malmsteen solos. It's just not who he is or his style. All right, so there you have it, the Axeweilders Spotlight. Be on the lookout for more. We'll be releasing plenty of these because I have a gigantic list on the fridge of guitar players that I'd like to work my way through. And if you like what you saw, please hit the like and subscribe button. Also, please feel free to go ahead and leave your own lists. I would be really interested to know what some of your favorite Iommi riffs are, solos, stuff that I did not cover. Stay metal out there, guys, and we'll catch you later.